You have some countries that actually thoughtfully examine how they do business with us. And then you have people like the Canadians who are in elections. So you have no idea. You think it's about a trade war. This is their way of getting election votes.
24 hours before Doug Ford and a number of other people from Canada were going to meet with Howard Lutnick to discuss this trade war, to discuss everything, all of these threats and nonsense that has been going on, Howard Lutnick laid scorched earth on Doug Ford and Canada as a whole and called out exactly what our politicians are doing. And Doug Ford did it himself. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, like, comment your thoughts down below, and give me a follow on other social media platforms as well. We're going to be talking about Mark Carney giving the boot to some of Justin Trudeau's best friends, because apparently that means that you're totally eligible for a very, very high-ranking file within the Canadian government. Totally, right? One of them in particular, what he said as he was walking out is so shocking. Or it's not at all, because it is just as pompous as he is. Some other news coming out of the public budget officer and Liberals refusing to accept the truth and then instead doing their darndest to gaslight you and mislead you with the way that they're now describing things. We're going to get to that one right away. But first, here's a little reminder from none other than Brian Lilly.
The idea that Mark Carney and the Liberals are suddenly the runaway favorites for the next election is nothing but a media narrative by a national press gallery that is obsessed with Mark Carney and who hates Pierre Poilievre as much as most Canadians hate Justin Trudeau. Let me point out once again, all the same people that were around Trudeau are now behind Carney. All the same policies are there, other than they'll scrap the consumer carbon tax and increase the carbon tax, on things like steel mills, which will mean lost jobs, especially when coupled with Donald Trump's tariffs.
Oh, and you are definitely going to want to stick around, because in regard to Trump tariffs and Mark Carney, he said something again that, it leaves one to wonder, perhaps, does Mr. Carney have Alzheimer's or something? I don't know, because how do you forget what you said a week ago? And then say, what's going on there? My guy, do you need to up your vitamins? I don't understand how that makes any sense. Let us first get into the impact assessment from the PBO of the proposed emissions cap that Stephen Guilbeault and all of the Liberals said was going to boost our economy. It was going to make production soar, that the industry was going to grow as a result of a cap on emissions, which, you just got to think a little bit. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but okay, perhaps they have a point. Maybe there's something about this that we didn't know, that common sense didn't tell us. I don't know. Well, turns out that we were right. So Guilbeault initially said that he was committed to carrying out the Liberal climate goals, despite the backlash. He also said that the regulations can be achieved with existing technology without cutting production, adding that federal modeling has shown even with regulations, oil and gas production will still rise by 16% by 2032 compared with 2019. He went on in this article to say reducing emissions from Canada's oil patch is the only way Canadian oil will remain competitive in a world that is increasingly looking for the greenest option available. Well, that's actually not true. You see, most governments and countries are in deficits. Some of them are quite high. Lots of them have affordability issues. Lots of them have higher energy costs, which in turn leads to more and more people who are suffering. And it's not that the world is looking for a greener option, and being green, cutting our production and putting all of these crazy regulations in is going to help us in our economy be competitive, because it turns out that most people actually just care about the price point.
If you know much about Stephen Guilbeault, I don't know if I've ever heard you.
I'm wanting to learn less, just by your description.
Well, one thing I find so offensive, you talk about the disrespect to our province. This is a guy who is an environmental advocate. He's best known for scaling the CN Tower in opposition of fossil fuels when he was working as an environmental advocate. But he also scaled the house of our premier.
So he's a rock climber, not an engineer.
Maybe he'd be better at that. But imagine that. Imagine somebody going and taking a criminal offense, going onto the roof of a premier, and then they make that person in charge and trying to dictate to us how to pull our resources out of ground, how to manage our natural resources, how to manage our electricity grid. That's what Justin Trudeau has done. So I'm trying to get him fired, and I would love your help on that.
Yeah! Now, here is what the PBO estimated the projected real gross domestic product would fall by 2032. And it was 0.39%, which does not account for inflation, and that would attribute to roughly $20.5 billion if the emissions cap prevents the industry from achieving that level of growth. Now, keep in mind, these are all things that Mark Carney has said he is fully in support of. The only thing he isn't in support of is the consumer carbon tax, and it's not because he wants to get rid of it, it's because it's unpopular, so he's trying to rephrase it so that it is more popular. Now, Ottawa has routinely called this a pollution cap, but yeah, it's a production cap, and forecasts from Canada's energy regulator show the fossil fuel industry could have been on track to increase production by more than 15% in that exact same timeline. And again, in a statement, the spokesperson for Environment and Climate Change, Minister Stephen Guilbeault, disputed that the federal cap would result in a production cut. He says, and I quote, "The pollution cap drives oil and gas CEOs to reinvest their profits back into Canada instead of overseas, all while allowing increased production." Some more information from the PBO was that on top of the GDP decreasing by 0.39%, they also say that achieving the legal upper bound of the cap during the first compliance period would reduce economy-wide employment in Canada by 40,000 jobs, 40,300, and full-time equivalents by 54,400 in 2032. Doesn't it just seem kind of radical? You know, you say Donald Trump is the biggest threat to our democracy and our sovereignty. He's trying to impoverish Canadians, but then you have our own government advocating for this stuff, and worse, defending it. Jonathan Wilkinson posted my statement on today's PBO report. Unfortunately, the PBO wasted their time and taxpayer dollars by analyzing a made-up scenario that the government of Canada is not even remotely proposing. By suggesting the only way to achieve emissions reductions in the oil and gas industry is to cut production. The PBO is once again misleading the public and ignoring reality. Governments and industry themselves have agreed on the potential of technically achievable carbon capture technologies to cut pollution from the oil and gas industry, while production of oil and gas increases and thousands of good jobs are created. Okay, sure. So why are you even putting a cap at all if it's your understanding that governments and premiers and everybody's already in the works of doing all these great things to make sure that we have cleaner energy being produced? And also, Danielle Smith has been talking about carbon capture for years, and they've actually made some pretty good headway on it. And that's always been ignored by the federal government. So at this moment in time, in fact, yes, putting a cap on emissions is putting a cap on production.
No nation on earth has more resource wealth per person than Canada. We have the potential to be an energy and economic juggernaut, able to punch well above our weight class in virtually anything, from energy to manufacturing to technology to military defense. As Canadians, if we're going to survive this dispute with our neighbors in the short term and win in the long term, we must commit to this strategy. No more excuses. It's time to start building pipe, developing resources, and constructing new ports on every coast without further delay.
Oh, and by the way, the parliamentary budget officer also confirmed that this emissions cap will not only damage the Canadian job sector economy and our ability to remain competitive, but global emissions will continue to increase at the same time, and it won't even make a dent. So when you hear Canadian politicians, left-leaning ones, talking about climate change and how much it's an existential threat, oh, you just want to watch the world burn, you should be ashamed that you exist or heat your home. Oh, we need to punish you with high taxes. so that energy is more expensive and life is less affordable. I'd just like for you to reflect on this. Marty says, Carney would have us sacrifice ourselves economically with minimal to zero impact on the planet. Meanwhile, he's hiding his personal assets overseas. I talked about that in a video yesterday if you want to take a look back at it. But seriously, though, yeah, this is annual emissions from Canada from 1750 to 2023 compared to India, the United States, China, and the world as a whole. I think that really speaks for itself. Also, one thing that's interesting is Americans don't have a carbon tax, and they actually have lower emissions per capita than Canada does, if you can see in this graph here as well. The per capita argument is one that's always kind of annoyed me, solely because, we have such a vast land. We have cold winters, hot summers. It makes sense to me that per capita we would emit more for that reason alone. And keep in mind, there's tons of people where, in the United States, let's say you live in downtown Los Angeles, traffic sucks. So there are a lot of people who take public transit, they take trains, whatever. We don't have that infrastructure across the country like they do in other parts of the world. And we are much more spread out in Canada than other parts of the world, which obviously would increase that per capita amount.
Canadians are rejecting you. Canadians are rejecting your government. Canadians want a change, but you continue to hold this country hostage. You continue to implement unsustainable climate change hysteria policies that are hurting us economically. They are not common sense. The average Canadian is hurting because of your policies and the things you and your government are doing.
So Mark Carney is being sworn in as Prime Minister tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. in Ottawa, and he's making some changes to cabinet. He's cutting a couple of jobs there. Went from 20. He's going to be cutting that down to 15, he says.
We all look forward to Mr. Carney swearing in as our next Prime Minister. It will be a day of great pride for Canada. And
Stephen Guilbeault was one of them. Now, Guilbeault is not getting fired or anything. He is just going to have a different portfolio under Mark Carney's cabinet, which is interesting because prior to Mark Carney winning, Guilbeault was all over the news talking about, how much he endorses and has confirmed and chatted at great lengths with Mark Carney about climate change and how that's a really big deal to them. So I wonder if perhaps there's just going to be a new portfolio that will still have something to do with the environment, because I don't really know what else Stephen Guilbeault would do. His whole life has been about climate change. And this guy's whole life has been about, being a troll.
Are you gonna probe?
Well, Pierre Poilievre is pulling another one of his convoy moves. They tried that going to the Governor General.
Mark Miller, a man who has always creeped me out, arguably one of the men on Trudeau's cabinet that has some of the worst diplomatic skills of all time, who got the job probably because, well, he's been best friends with Justin Trudeau forever, and it helps to know people who are powerful, I suppose. Mark Miller, who allowed over 40% of businesses who were exploiting the temporary foreign worker program to not pay up. Mark Miller, who flooded our country with people, and who also announced just a couple days ago that Canada was going to make 6,000 illegal immigrants legal, because nothing screams, "We don't care," like encouraging people to come here illegally. This is probably some of the best news of the day. I am so happy to not ever have to hear that pompous man ever again. Mark Carney's cabinet is not going to include Mark Miller. The updates that we do know of, Stephen Guilbeault, which we just talked about. Also, Melanie Joly will be keeping her foreign affairs post, but Mark Miller, he's going back to the back benches here, which is just so very satisfying. I am so happy that I never have to hear him give a public address again.
Are you going to take accountability for the destructive immigration policies that you have, sir?
I understand you don't like immigrants.
Excuse me, sir, that's a false misrepresentation of me. I actually appreciate all Canadians, but I don't appreciate our infrastructure being overrun with reckless policies that burden our hospitals, take jobs from young people, and take housing options away from our communities. Sir, that's the fact. It's a simple supply and demand equation. We have too many people coming in and we cannot accommodate them. This has nothing to do with not liking immigrants. This has everything to do with liking Canadians and protecting our Canadian economy so that we can actually take these people in and actually accommodate them.
Having said that, though, it doesn't really matter who Carney moves around. I mean, the few people who he's brought in are all people from Trudeau camp. They're all the same type of liberals, every single one of them.
No matter who it is that takes over this Liberal Party, you will not work with them.
The institution we are facing is the Liberal Party of Canada. It has been deeply transformed by Mr. Trudeau, and there is no possible way for this party to become something else in a few weeks. So we are facing the same people with the same values, the same ideology. We have to go in elections.
Look at who is trying to rise from the ashes. It's the other Randy. The other Randy's back, baby.
And that we're serious. And that's the hope that I have for this campaign, is that we're going to come together as a country. We're going to send a clear message to the world that we're united, and then we can face these tariffs from the United States. And we have common cause, Michael, with the European Union, with Australia, with other countries that the United States is picking on, no more so than Canada. And so we're going to take this fight to the Americans through and right after the election.
So Donald Trump said earlier today that there's no way he plans to remove the additional 25% tariffs that he has on steel and aluminum. And I just thought this was so very funny. So Mark Carney posted 22 hours ago now, my message to our steel and aluminum workers: you have our full support now and for the future. We are going to build big things in Canada, and we need every one of you. And nothing screams Team Canada more than this. Because just a few weeks ago, here's what Mark Carney had to say about imposing his own taxes on steel and aluminum because nobody uses it anymore.
Secondly, what we're going to do is make sure not that the government pays, not that we as taxpayers pay, but the large polluters pay. And so what happens...
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, you know, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd? I mean, not as much we used to. So anyway,
holy crap, the Liberals are dropping like flies. This just in moments ago, Health Minister Mark Holland, remember him.
Right? Don't worry, kids, about climate change. Don't worry about taking action on the planet. Enjoy your 10 hours in the car and let the planet burn.
He has resigned as Mark Carney becomes Prime Minister. It just seems kind of weird that Mark Carney hasn't even been sworn in yet, but he has already planned a taxpayer trip to Europe. He has prioritized that over, I don't know, perhaps a trip all around the country so that everybody can get to know him, or perhaps a trip to the White House even. It's crazy to me that we have this threat of Donald Trump, which the entire Liberal Party has been campaigning on and using to their advantage. But the second he is officially sworn in tomorrow, by Monday, he's already leaving the country to go to Europe. Huh. That's really something. Big hats off, by the way, to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe for criticizing this because, yeah, what the hell, dude?
That his first planned international visit is to the European Union? Not good. Not good. We don't have a trade war with the European Union today. We are in the midst of a trade war with the United States of America and China, the two largest economies in the world and our two largest export markets and trading partners. To choose to go to the European Union is beyond what I could understand as being in any way impactful or representing Canadians. And so I would ask Mr. Carney to reconsider that, engage immediately with the Chinese government, continue and engage and lay his plan out with respect to how he is going to engage with the United States of America. And I would suggest that plan should not include anything in the way of export tariffs. Anyone that is running for the Liberal Party of Canada or any party in the next election listens to these next words. More impactful than a temporary loss of jobs in the canola crush industry is the markets that we are losing. The markets that we are losing are going to be they were incredibly hard to build in the first place, and they're going to be incredibly hard to regain. And so I don't know that those jobs will immediately come back. This is the reason that I ask Prime Minister-designate Carney to reach out, make his first engagement with the government of China to find a way through these very, very disastrous counter tariffs that
Team Canada is definitely not looking too hot right now. And the reason why I personally think is because they're going about this entirely the wrong way. And we have the worst people to be trying to deal with this right now, thanks to not having a functioning government with a mandate.
So you're saying when it looks chaotic and unpredictable from the outside, that there actually is a master plan when it comes to these tariffs?
It is not chaotic. And the only one who thinks it's chaotic is someone who's being silly. He said reciprocal tariffs.
Nobody expected him to announce 50% tariffs this morning.
He needed to break some guy in Ontario who said he was going to tax American energy 25%. The President of the United States in the White House says, "Oh, no, you won't," and breaks him. Breaks him. In what? By a tweet and a truth. And you think that's chaotic? You know what I think that is? I think that is the thank God we have a president who's taking care of us. Because if you were in one of those states and you thought your energy prices were going to go up 25%, and you said, "Where's the president?" and all of a sudden he came down like thunder to make that end, you'd say, cool. I'm glad that's the guy in the White House, and that's what we've got.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to being able to update you on how that meeting went with Howard Lutnick and Doug Ford, as well as a couple of other Canadians who are down there right now representing the government to try to figure something out. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, like, comment your thoughts down below. Give me a follow on other social media platforms as well. And stay tuned for coverage of Mark Carney officially being crowned Supreme Leader of Canada tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. We will have all of those details tomorrow on Over Opinionated.